I know you want to characterize this as we're okay to go after the wealthy and the conservatives are not, but there are a lot of people who do not feel wealthy who feel you are going after them.
I would really disagree with the greatest respect.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Chrystia Freeland entered the Lioness's Den today to face Vassy Kapelos to talk about her capital gains tax. Freeland tried to use her talking point that this new tax measure is fair for every generation. And in response, Vassy called out the entire Liberal government on this mess that they have created, which is called the current state of Canada.
Let's take a look.
Debate there in the House of Commons ahead of a key vote on a contentious tax proposal. The vote went the government's way. 208 votes in favor of the motion, 118 against. The Tories were the ones to vote against the Liberals' plan to increase Canada's capital gains inclusion rate, calling it a, quote, as you heard there, job killer. The Liberals, as you also heard there, are meanwhile accusing the Tories of voting against tax fairness. The changes coming into effect on June 25th will see the capital gains inclusion rate increase from 1/2 to 2/3 on gains above $250,000 for individuals and on all capital gains realized by most corporations and trusts. Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is with us here live in studio to talk more about the issue. Hi, Minister. Good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
Hi, Vassy. And you gave a great, concise summary. The only little summary thing I'll add super quickly is principal residences continue to be fully exempted from capital gains.
And I understand why you're making that point, because people are going to be very worried if they sell their house, are they going to be subject to a higher tax rate? So I get why you're making
It's most people's biggest asset, and so it's important to let people know that.
Again, the fact that they're even having to say that makes you really understand that they've actually talked about that being a possibility behind the scenes. That if you actually sell your principal house, at some point, Chrystia Freeland's going to be taxing that.
Well, not right now, though. Let's not freak everybody out. But it's always a possibility in the future.
Right. So at least they're leaving it alone for now. And
for now,
this is probably going to be the most comfortable in this interview that Chrystia Freeland is. And like, oh, thanks for describing it that way. I'm just going to add one more thing.
So I wanted to start off, Minister, and ask you if, from your perspective, this is about sound economic policy or about cornering the Conservatives?
Sound economic policy.
Why?
Because we believe in fairness for every generation. And we know that right now Canada needs to make investments. We need to make big investments in housing, big investments in affordability, things like a national school food program, early learning and childcare, dental care, big investments in jobs and growth, things like our $5 billion investment in basic research. And we know that to pay for those investments, the way to do it is through tax fairness, because we know we have to do it in a fiscally responsible way. When we were putting the budget together, it was really important for me to be fiscally responsible so we could support the Bank of Canada and get to a place where the bank could lower interest rates. They did that last week, first country in the G7 to start on the downward path. That's really important for Canadians.
I just want to start by commenting on Chrystia Freeland's appearance. They've done very light makeup on her, and they've done kind of like a light hairdo, like it's not all curled and fancy. I think they're trying to make her look more relatable, more human to the average person. Even the clothes she's wearing, they're dark and they're not over the top. They're just...
That's not loud in your face.
Yeah, they're trying to humanize her to the public who may be upset about this new tax measure.
Yeah, it's interesting. She's still wearing the pearls, but they're a little bit hidden.
Yeah.
You know, because she has a very, very high cut shirt, right? So it's covering some of the pearls. And yeah, Fox might be onto something there. But it just gets me when she says, oh, well, it was really important to me for this year's budget to do it in a fiscally responsible way. Well, where was that importance in the previous 9 years? Because there's no evidence that you actually took any of the other budgets in a fiscally responsible way.
And this one's not even fiscally responsible. They're just creating a new tax to tax Canadians for their crazy spending spree.
Well, listen to that. The way we need to pay for these things, we felt that was basically new taxes. Hello? all you've been giving Canadians is new taxes. And because you want to throw in all of these terrible programs that we can't afford, then you said, oh, I guess we can't afford them. How are we going to do that? Well, let's just add some more taxes to people.
Well, and let's not forget, it's not just the cost of the physical programs. Like, it's not just taxpayers paying for birth control pills. It's the administration of that program as well.
It's often the biggest cost.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see what the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has to say about all these new programs.
Well, and remember, Justin Trudeau has increased the size of the public service by around 40%. It's around 100,000 new public servants. Guess what's going to happen with pharmacare? They're going to have to set up a new agency. And what does that entail? You guessed it, more public servants.
And the Liberals like to pretend that new public servants are creating new jobs and are great for the economy, when in fact they are costing taxpayers money. They are taking from the economy and not giving back.
Things you're talking about, though, dental care, Canada Child Benefit, daycare, they tally up to far more on an annual basis than this will bring in over 5 billion years. Why are you presenting it as a panacea to all that?
I'm not presenting it as a panacea.
Just so everybody knows, when they're talking about panacea, if you don't know what that means, it's a fancy word for the solution to all things.
Yeah, it's like a cure-all.
Yeah. So what Vassy is saying that Freeland is presenting this new capital gains tax is doing is it's going to fund all of the new programs and it's going to solve all of her fiscal problems. That's basically what she's saying. And Freeland's like, no, it's not.
But I am presenting it as a meaningful way to raise money to fund the things that Canadians need. It's nearly $20 billion over the fiscal framework, and it is a fair way to do it. Because right now in Canada, the reality is a nurse or a plumber can pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. That's not fair.
Okay, what does she mean there? What she's saying is a nurse or a plumber may be paying, tax. So the marginal rate, what that is that's the highest bracket that they're in, right? So for every tax bracket that you're in, you're taxed at a different rate. So, for example, between 35,000 and 55,000, let's just say you're taxed at 25%. So that means that every dollar that you make between those $2 amounts is taxed at 25%. And then over that, you may be taxed at 31%. And these aren't the actual numbers. I'm just spitballing them out there. So let's say the plumber makes $60,000 a year. So 5,000 of that, between 55 and 60,000, would be taxed at 31%. And 31% would be that marginal tax rate. So what is she saying? Well, she's saying that the plumber or the nurse is going to be taxed at their highest rate, that marginal tax rate. Let's just say it's 35%. And there's not really much they can do about it. But she's saying that a millionaire can actually take a bunch of steps because they have some flexibility and they have the cash to do it, to actually lower their tax rate by writing things off and making certain investments and that sort of thing, to actually drop their lower tax, their marginal tax rate to perhaps below the nurse or the plumber. That's what she's saying.
Yeah, but I think, and okay, I'm not an expert in economics by any margin, but I think what she is doing is conflating corporate taxes with personal taxes. So the highest personal tax bracket here in Canada, I think in Ontario at least, is around 54%, if I'm not mistaken. So that's your marginal tax rate if you earn, I think it's over $250,000 a year. Again, I don't know, I can't remember. Point being that if you're a millionaire and that's your personal taxes, you're paying more than half of your income back to the government. Okay, but she's trying to say that people who own corporations pay about, I think it's around 12% corporate tax rate. And then they can, quote unquote, hide their money or cook their books or do something so that they're not paying that 54%. So she's talking about really different things based on my understanding of it.
Yeah, and it's actually difficult to narrow in what exactly she's saying, because she's trying to speak in very broad terms, so you can't really nail her down to see what she's talking about. But the bottom line is she's trying to say this new capital gains increase, this is the solution to all of our problems, and we're going to go after the 0.13% of all Canadians, and it's time for them to pay their fair share. That's the narrative.
So if we need money to make investments in Canada and Canadians, this is the fair way to do it.
I think you did present it as a panacea. I'm going to challenge the way that you're framing that based on your comments on Sunday. I'll read them directly to you. Do you want to live in a country where those at the very top live lives of luxury, but must do so in gated communities behind ever higher fences, using private healthcare and airplanes because the public sphere is so degraded and the wrath of the vast majority of their less privileged compatriots burns so hot? This is going to fix all that. And what responsibility does your government bear for putting us in that position in the first place?
Boom.
Oh my goodness.
Boom. Holy Vassy. I love it when she comes at these politicians like she's all
using
soft.
Her words against
yeah,
them.
but she's all soft and nice, and then she just throws this grenade over at them, and it's like, yeah, what responsibility do you guys take because you're the ones who screwed up the country? Good on you.
But above and beyond that, I can't believe Chrystia Freeland would say something like that. Or maybe I can, but it's still so reprehensible. Pretty much telling people who are suffering, it's not your fault. It's the fault of these rich elites who live in these, ivory towers. Not realizing that Chrystia Freeland is one of those rich elites.
Yeah, never mind the fact that she makes, what, $300,000 a year minimum?
She makes a lot of dough on the backs of the taxpayer.
This is really going to help Canada because $20 billion is a meaningful amount of money to invest in the things Canadians need. Standing for fairness is really important too. So this is an important measure. I am glad that we're putting it forward. I'm glad that it is paying for things like the biggest housing program in Canadian history, things like dental care, things like our really important investments in AI. And what it's allowing us to do is make investments, do it in a fiscally responsible way because we're building on a position of fairness. And I really find, I've been talking to a lot of Canadians, and when I talk to Canadians, they say, yeah, you're right. It is not fair for a teacher or a carpenter to be paying tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. I think that makes sense to people.
But what's the proof point? Again, the second part of my question was, what responsibility does your government bear for putting us in a position where you yourself describe as the finance minister, the public sphere is so degraded? You talk about the money that your government is spending towards increasing the supply of housing. The CMHC says housing starts were down 7% nationally in 2023 from 2022 and expects them to further decline this year. Where's the proof point that the money you say that you're going to get from this additional revenue source is actually going to make Canadians' lives better?
And that's the question, right? And Vassy's calling it what it is. You're saying you're spending all this money and you're making Canadians' lives so much better. We've never had it so good. But the results are actually showing that things are getting worse the more you spend. And this is the problem.
It's like that episode of The Simpsons where I think it's Homer and possibly Chief Wiggum are in like this pit and they're like, no, dig up, stupid, dig up. Like, you're so far down, you think digging further will make it better? Like, it's just ridiculous.
Well, StatsCan actually reported today that permits are at a high, permits for new home building.
Permits are at a high.
Permits.
Yay.
So wait, is that like applications for permits? Is that permits in the process of being issued? Is that permits having been issued? Like,
Freeland, how many shovels are in the ground?
right.
That's the important stat. But, this is Freeland, right? Oh, we have a AAA credit rating. Don't look at the fact that we've doubled the debt. This is deflection at its lowest.
So that is a very, very positive moment. Yeah, but you need a permit before you build a house. And the fact that we have a fiscally responsible plan to invest in Canada and Canadians has supported the Bank of Canada in something that is so important for Canadians, which is to be in a place where inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for the past 4 months. That made it possible last week for the bank, the first country in the G7, to lower rates. But I do want to come back to what is at the heart of what we're doing. And what we're saying is we are a government that believes in fairness. We believe that everyone should be paying their fair share. We believe it's just not right for a teacher, a nurse, a plumber, an electrician to be paying tax at a higher marginal rate than a carpenter, than a multimillionaire. And that is what is the case right now in Canada.
And you believe only multimillionaires will be impacted by this? And I ask you that genuinely. I host a radio show during the day. I have been inundated the past 2 days with people who have called saying, I did not have a public sector job. I could not rely on a pension. So I decided to invest in a second rental property. I have worked nonstop in order to be able to do that. And I have paid taxes along the whole way. And now I'm being told I'm among the ultra wealthy that has to fund the government's income redistribution plan, essentially. Like, how is that about fairness?
Isn't that amazing? That on her radio show, she has these people calling in all the time talking about this. So, this isn't just politicians with anecdotes saying, oh, people are saying this. And Christian like, oh, I talk to people and they want to pay more taxes. But you have Vassy's like actually having people call in and talk to her. So there's no fake stories coming in. These are people that actually call into her radio show. So it's actually quite amazing that she is now throwing that back directly in Chrystia Freeland's face. Exactly. How is that fair? You have people working 2, 3 jobs, couples working 2 or 3 jobs each, working their butts off, managing to save enough a couple years ago to buy an investment property. And they thought, okay, this is a good decision. And then they were taxed on the land transfer tax. They were paying the realtor's fees. They're taxed on the property taxes every year. They were taxed on the income that they actually earned in order to purchase that house. And now the government's saying, oh, no. When you sell that, yeah, we're taking more.
Well, first of all, I think it is really important for Canadians to be clear about what this measure actually is. And so, as you said in your really good introduction, the first $250,000 of capital gains every single year is going to continue to be taxed at the current rate. You just spoke about a rental property. That means if a couple owns a rental property, their first $500,000 of profit that they make is taxed at the current rate. That's a lot, and they can do that every single year. According to our calculations, 0.13% of Canadians will pay more every single year based on these measures.
But that's just an annual basis. Just to challenge you for a second, that's just an annual basis, right? That's not, some people will only pay capital gains once over their entire lifetime. So the number of people who may be impacted could be far greater than what your government has put forward. I know you want to characterize this as we're okay to go after the wealthy and the Conservatives are not. But there are a lot of people who do not feel wealthy who feel you are going after them.
Excellent point, Vassy. That there are a lot of people who are just middle class, and the Liberal government is coming after them because they want your money so that they can spend it recklessly.
Well, and, the sad thing is that for a lot of people, that one time in your life that Vassy is talking about is when you inherit your parents' home when they pass away.
Yes, that's very true.
So when that changes custody, then no doubt you're going to sell it. Then the government's going to come after you for the capital gains. Like, that's what this means, right? Other people have been fortunate enough to have a cottage, and people are in the position where they can't afford to have the cottage anymore. Okay, I'm going to sell the cottage because that's the fiscally responsible thing for me to do. Actually fiscally responsible, not the Liberal fiscally responsible definition. And now you're going to come after them for that. Like, yeah, a lot of people feel like you're coming after their money.
The Liberals are framing this as an assault on the ultra wealthy, but really there's a lot of middle class people that are just going to get caught in the crosshairs.
Yep, absolutely. And this is why everyone is getting severely ticked off.
So again, I would really disagree with the greatest respect to some of the ways that you've characterized that. And I would just say this is not about going after anybody. What this is about is saying, do we, as I said in those comments that you read out, do we want to be a country that invests in the things we need? Do we want to be a country that invests in housing? Do we want to be a country that invests in affordability, in things like a national school food program, in things like a national early learning and childcare program? Do we want to be a country that invests in economic growth, in things like infrastructure, in things like our ITC program, which is building the industrial transition? I think we need to make all of those investments.
But that's not all your government's spending money on.
And I think the fair way to finance, you have to ask yourself, do you believe we need to make those investments? I do. And if you believe we need to make those investments, then you have to say, how are you going to finance them? Are you going to just take on more debt? I don't think that's right. I think the way to do it is through a fair tax policy, and that is exactly what this is.
Our Canadians, wouldn't it be understandable if they were also asking themselves, are we going to get a return on that investment? You haven't just spent money on the things you're talking about. You also spent money on contracts with McKinsey last week that the Auditor General said more than half of which she could not figure out if there was value for money. She also came to the same conclusion on ArriveCan. You have grown the public sector considerably while at the same time growing the size and the scope of the number of consultants that you've hired and contracted by 88% since you came into office, the reverse of what you promised to do in 2015. Why should Canadians be sure that while they are getting this additional tax for the investments you say are necessary, they will get a return on that investment?
Bang. Holy, Vassy is just skewering her.
Good. She deserves it.
And if you notice, Vassy has this encyclopedia of notes in front of her, right? She came ready to play today, folks.
Oh, she sure did. She came ready to win.
Right? Right? Like,
atta girl.
This is the lion's den, and there's only one lion, and that's Vassy right now.
Lioness.
Like, I don't mean to like go all fanboy over her, but this is how reporters should be challenging every politician on every news station. But it's only this one, right? I shouldn't say that. Mercedes Stephenson on Global has actually done a fair job as well. But Vassy is just going after, and this is great because these are the things that we would love to say to Freeland. And it's things that Fox and I have been saying for the last 6 months when we've been critiquing her in question period on her interviews and everything like that. So it's like Vassy's reading our mind and relaying what we want to say.
So I think the onus is absolutely on the government to spend Canadians' money wisely and well. One of the things that was in the budget that was really important for me is showing a decline in the size of the public service over the fiscal framework, a decline of 5,000 people. That's going to happen by attrition. No frontline services will be affected. But I put that in there very thoughtfully and intentionally because it was my view that if we were saying to Canadians, we're going to make significant investments based on tax fairness, I want to say to Canadians, and we're going to do it with care. But I do also want to really, push back, Vassy, against the notion that we don't need a government that invests. I do think
that's an unfair characterization. I'm saying, are Canadians getting return on those investments?
No, but it is actually the essential question here. Canadians have 3 essential choices before them. The first is, do you believe government needs to invest in you and in your country? Do you believe in things like government investing in housing so we can build more homes faster? Do you believe in things like a national program of early learning and childcare? Do you believe in things like the government investing $5 billion in basic research in universities as we have done? Do you believe in that? That's question number one. Question number two is, if you believe in that, how do you think we should pay for it? And what we're saying is, we don't think you should pay for it by just taking on more debt. Canada is running a very fiscally responsible policy, and you saw the results of that with the Bank of Canada lowering interest rates. So then you have to say to yourself, okay, then what kind of a tax system are we going to use to finance it? And this move that we're making on capital gains, it really is about bringing more fairness to the tax system. It's about saying someone whose only income is a salary, someone like a plumber, someone like a teacher, they just shouldn't be paying tax at a higher rate than someone who is a multimillionaire and whose principal income is through investment. And like the person who said it the best was actually a guy appointed by John Diefenbaker, who was kind of a conservative guy and who chaired a Royal Commission on Tax Reform, Kenneth Carter. And he said, a buck is a buck is a buck. And that was the principle that guided his recommendation that we tax capital gains in Canada. I think that is absolutely right, and I'm glad we're doing it.
I understand the fairness argument they're putting forward. The third question that you didn't flag, though, was the one that I'll circle back to. It's not just if you think you should invest or not. It's if you think the investments will actually pay off in the long term, that there will be a return on the investments you're making for Canadians. There is so much, but there is so much evidence that that's not the case. There are more people. Let me finish. There are more people than ever going to the food bank. GDP per capita is on the decline right now. Productivity, our own Deputy Bank of Canada governor is sounding an alarm about how terrible our productivity is relative to the United States. What is the evidence that you're going to take all that money from this new tax scheme and invest in ways that actually better our country? And don't you bear responsibility for the place we're at right now?
Vassy, are you like a closet conservative now? Because you almost sound like this is question period.
No, she's neutral as a reporter and does her job properly. Right.
It's just the fact that so Freeland went on this tirade like she does to try and run out the clock and get off of the stage. So first she started with this false equivalence where she deliberately mischaracterized the question and tried to equate her answer to something completely different. And then she started down this line of gaslighting and just, ran off a cliff with it. And I'm glad Vassy interrupted her. It was like, where are you going with this? You're not even answering the question. The question was not, should we be making investments? Yes, the government should be paying for things in any country. That's one of the jobs of the government. But the real question is are you spending that money wisely? These quote-unquote investments that Freeland constantly is stating in any interview, anytime she's in front of a microphone these days, are they getting Canadians value for money? And you heard Vassy just going off there's so much evidence that it's not. And she just rattled off a whole bunch of different sources of evidence for it.
And folks, anytime Chrystia Freeland or Justin Trudeau or any of the other Liberals use the term investments, the term they should correctly be using is deficit spending.
Right. Because that's what they're doing.
It's not an investment, it's deficit spending. They are spending money that Canadians do not have.
And here's the thing. So the responsible thing for them to do would have been to say, okay, so we're through the pandemic, we're through our spending spree. Now it's time to actually lower government spending. That way we're in a balanced budget perspective or even a surplus budget perspective. And then when you're in that surplus budget, then you can look at, okay, so now we can look at possibly lowering taxes for Canadians to make things more affordable. Right? Because that's the number one priority for Canadians. But no, what Freeland does is say, okay, so things are really expensive right now. So instead of lowering taxes, we're going to spend even more money to create brand new government programs. But, we got to pay for that. So let's tax people even more and make things even more unaffordable.
Vassy, I am 100% sure that our massive investments in early learning and childcare are already making life more affordable for Canadians and are already helping our economy. We have the highest participation rate of women of working age in Canadian history. Early learning and childcare has really helped to drive that, and that is helping our economy to grow, and it is helping Canadian families, and it is helping Canadian kids at the same time. I am equally absolutely sure that our investments in housing are absolutely necessary. What Canada is suffering from today is a legacy of underinvestment in housing, and we are turning that around and fixing it. And I am absolutely sure that we had to do this in a fiscally responsible way. And for me, the proof of the pudding is that just a few days ago, the Bank of Canada was able to lower interest rates, first country in the G7. So fairness for every generation, it's the right thing for Canada and Canadians, and it is working.
How much do you want to bet that the Liberals called up the governor of the Bank of Canada and said, lower the interest rates or you're fired?
Can they do that?
I don't know.
It does seem odd to me because we all want lower interest rates. There's no question of that. But if you lower them too quick, people will start borrowing again too fast, and that's bad for the economy too.
This interest rate lowering is very peculiar because everyone that has been analyzing it has been saying, so this isn't going to be like other interest rates, because usually when interest rates start coming down, it's a sign. It's a sign that inflation is going down. It's a sign that all interest rates are coming down. But what everybody is saying is you're going to see this drop in interest rates once, and then it's going to stay there. And that's something to be concerned of for exactly the reasons that Fox is saying. Because what's probably going to happen is because this interest rate drop, there's going to be people rushing out to buy a house. And what's that going to do? That has the banks printing money. And what does printing money do?
Causes inflation.
Causes inflation.
But above and beyond that, our GDP is on the decline. It seems peculiar, again, that they would lower the interest rate when the GDP is on the decline. Usually that indicates a recession.
Right.
Again, I'm not an economist, but something smells off here.
Well, it goes back, right? It goes back to their debt to GDP ratio, right? And because the Liberals are including the Canada Pension Plan in this, that's why they're saying, well, we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. Well, when you take the pension plan away, it paints a very problematic story for the economy. And when usually countries with this type of debt ratio, they're on the verge of an economic crisis. And Pierre's been saying this for about a year, that this is coming. The mortgage defaults are going to come. This is the big problem, folks, is that over the next year, there's going to be a slew of mortgage defaults. The banks are very nervous about that.
Right, because banks don't want houses. They don't want to be closing on houses.
Right, because they're gonna be losing money on these things. So, and all that money is already printed. It's already in the economy. So now what? Right? This is the whole problem here. And this is what caused the 2008 financial crash, because there was all kinds of mortgages that just defaulted everywhere.
And it was a lot worse in the States. And it would have been a lot worse in Canada if it weren't for Stephen Harper. And let's not forget, and this isn't to shame anybody who may have voted Liberal in 2015, but let's remember that in 2015, the Harper government tried to pass a balanced budget, which was then voted down and we went to election. So just please, next time we go to the polls, make sure you pay attention to what the budget is, what the budget is being proposed, because this is how we ended up in this mess. We went from a balanced budget, which is like the greatest gift a government can give. And because Trudeau and the Liberals were elected, now we're in this horrendous mess. So please just be very cognizant of what's going on in this country when you cast your vote at the next election.